On November the 26th, 2008, 50-year-old gamekeeper Nigel Bacon is murdered in the driveway of his cottage in Clumber Park, Nottinghamshire. Police uncover a dark taboo. His murder is a contract killing, plotted by his son and his wife.
Stuart has to cope with the fact that his mother and his brother murdered his father.
For her to go and plan and go through with what she did behind his back, just pure evil.
They must have been stood there thinking, I hope he dies, he's got to die.
Britain's Darkest Taboos reveals the shocking real-life stories behind the most horrific acts of familial crime, including murder.
Laura had to witness her own mother being shot dead.
He took her life, and our Alison's, and our Tanya's.
Child destruction.
This is one of the most brutal murders I've come across.
He stabbed my daughter and granddaughter.
And incest.
She stops seeing her father as a father. She starts seeing him as the sexual predator that he is.
I never thought he'd go as far as to rape me, ever in a million years. He was my dad.
Stuart Bacon is born in April 1980 in Mansfield, Woodhouse, to parents Susan and Nigel Bacon, and has a close relationship with his mother.
She was nice, she was loving, she was like a mum should be, she was cuddly. We always used to watch telly together.
Stuart idolises his dad.
I love my dad. I loved him more than anything. I watch my little boy now and how he looks at me, and that's just how I looked at him.
However, as Stuart is growing up, he discovers his dad was previously married and has two daughters, Lindsay and Kerry.
My dad was one for the women. He was married before my mum, but obviously my dad was cheating everywhere. My mum was the one that, well, I'll have a kid and I'll make sure that I tie him down, and yeah, she did that.
Kerry believes her father was manipulated by Susan.
She wanted probably what my mum had, and he were a good-looking bloke when he were younger. I think she trapped him.
Forensic psychologist Dr. Kerry Nixon works with Merseyside Police in domestic homicides and has been looking into Susan's background.
She wanted him. And she was the kind of character that when she wanted something, she would go after it.
Susan and Nigel marry in 1984, and Stuart attends the same school as his half-sister, Kerry.
I think I always knew about Kerry, to be honest with you. We were like brother and sister at school. We referred to each other as brother and sister, but we kind of wasn't, if you know what I mean.
Nigel refuses to acknowledge Kerry as his child.
It was like there was a great big wall between us, which wasn't our fault, but there wasn't much we could do about it.
And Susan is adamant Kerry is not Nigel's daughter.
Kerry is not your dad's. We will not talk about that. She won't accept it, because I think to accept it, it would mean that while my dad was promising my mum the world, you know, obviously I've left my wife for you, this, that, other, obviously my dad wasn't, because obviously Kerry, my sister, was born in November and I was born the following year in the April, so my dad had to be going between the two women.
Psychologist Emma Kenny works with families and victims of familial crime in her clinics.
In this case, it seems to be that Susan felt a level of envy and jealousy of his previous life, and she didn't want to contaminate her home with his past life.
As Stuart gets older, he begins to notice his dad has a dark side.
You knew that there were always, you know, some sort of violence in the home. He wasn't violent towards me as a child. He'd be angry. And all my dad had to do was just shout. You'd be able to hear him in the house. So he was that lad when he'd like shout and scream at you. You knew instantly just to stop it.
I didn't even know my dad. Even I was scared of him when I seen him as well, because like obviously the odd things that my mum had said. Because he was a very big man and he did look frightening, but Stuart was frightened.
Susan tells her son she is protecting him from his violent father.
She used to make out like that she took beatings for me and stuff. You know, if I'd done something wrong, it were all I took the hassle for that. I got the slap for that sort of thing. So it was like she was protecting me. But then when Michael was born, it was like that went.
Stuart is 8 years old when his brother Michael is born, and family life as he knows it changes forever. Susan starts neglecting him.
It's much easier to love a cute little child. So she gives her attention to the new baby and takes out her neglect and aggression and frustrations on Stuart.
Nigel's violence in the home is escalating, and instead of protecting Stuart, Susan encourages her husband to take his anger out on their eldest son.
If you didn't do what she wanted, she'd find a way of getting you back. Whenever I didn't do what my mum wanted, she'd wind my dad up. She'd wind him up to the point that obviously he'd be violent and it'd all kick off.
He says quite often he'd go out and come back and she'd say, if you don't do this, I'm telling you, Dad. He said, just to cause ruptions and trouble. He says she was the biggest instigator of the problems in the house.
I'd either get a kick in or I'd be locked in my room for, sometimes it could be days. I've been locked in the coal shed a few times, which was very difficult because that was full of tools and push bikes. So when they used to lock me in there at night, I used to have to like stand up. So I would stand up all night sort of thing.
You can only imagine how a child who has grown up for 8 years of his life feeling loved and nurtured and cared for and safe, suddenly becoming the victim of domestic violence, being abused by the people who thought loved him. He would have been confused and distraught. But more importantly, he wouldn't have known where to go with this. He was on his own.
What's particularly shocking in this case is that Susan Bacon shows no maternal instincts. She neglects her son. She shows no love or affection to her family. She's very devious. It's all about what Susan wants.
While his dad is physically the violent one, Stuart believes his mum brings out the worst in him. He remembers happier times with his father, while Susan is in hospital during the birth of their third and final son.
Honestly, it was just me, my dad and Michael. That was the best 2 weeks with my dad all my life. He was such a proper dad. Literally, the day my mum come out of hospital with my baby brother, which should be a really happy time, I was over the moon, my little brother. Within an hour of my mum coming home, she managed to spark things off and wind my dad up, that all the violence just ended up kicking off that night. It was that kind of relationship with them. They was literally, together, they was literally just evil.
We know Nigel had previous for domestic abuse. We know that that is in his nature. He is described as a bully. When he got into a relationship with Susan, she also had an aggressive nature. So the two together became mutually abusive.
At the age of 14, Stuart takes on a part-time job.
Took paper round on just to get out the house. My mum used to take the money. I used to earn it and my mum used to spend it.
One night, Stuart bumps into Kerry, his half-sister, and is covered in bruises.
Stuart was doing a paper round and you could tell he'd been beaten up.
And when I bumped into her, she was like giving me a cuddle, she was crying. I can understand from her point, she's my sister, she cares about me, she was in bits. She was like, you need to tell someone, we need to tell someone. I was begging her not to. In fact, I was prepared never to talk to her again if she did, because I needed to protect myself. I knew that if she went and told anybody, I would take a kicking for that. Even more so because obviously she was Diane's daughter, my sister, my dad's ex-wife. That was just going to cause a lot of trouble, and I knew that.
Concerned about her brother, Kerry informs the school about the abuse and the police are involved. Nigel and Susan claim Stuart is a tearaway teen who regularly gets involved in fights and deny the allegations. Tragically, no further action is taken.
It was like my parents had got a ticket then, that Super got away with it. Look, everyone thinks he's really bad, so now we've got to really punish him. So they did.
For 14-year-old Kerry, the consequences are devastating.
I was just looking out for my brother. I didn't see Stuart again.
Kerry loses contact with her brother, and the abuse on Stuart escalates with terrifying consequences.
They chained me up, they also tried to hang me too, and then they left. I thought I was either going to die in there or they were just going to come back and torture me more.
It's 1995 in Mansfield, Woodhouse, and Stuart Bacon is growing up in a violent home with parents Nigel and Susan Bacon. But to the outside world, they appear the perfect family.
Nigel and Susan were popular in the local community and they were very well thought of. But behind closed doors, from 8 years of age, everything changed for Stuart.
Stuart is regularly assaulted by his father, while his mum Susan watches.
Lifestyle was more important because money and keeping face and not accepting things it was more important to her than me.
In 1995, Nigel Bacon asks his son to commit a crime for him.
He'd decided that he was going to drop me off down on the lane and I was going to go and set fire to this car.
Stuart stands up to his father and refuses.
I didn't go and do it because obviously I didn't feel comfortable with it.
But Nigel and Susan appear to see this as a personal insult and inflict an horrific attack on their son.
You couldn't have picked a worse pair to be together. My mum was just there. Obviously, I was getting a lot of verbal abuse off her. My dad, he battered me. It was pretty horrific. They chained me up. They also tried to hang me too.
Nigel and Susan appear to get a thrill from the assault on their son.
And then they left. I didn't have much hope. I thought I was either going to die in there or they were just going to come back and torture me more. And to be honest with you, if they was going to come back and I had to live that life with them anymore, I'd as sooner just died that day. I just wanted it all to end.
Fortunately for Stuart, the assault was witnessed by some teenagers in the area, and they called the police.
Apparently, according to the police, they went to bed. That's where they found my parents when they went to arrest them and they found them in bed. I presume they left me there to die, to be honest with you.
Nigel and Susan are both charged with neglect and false imprisonment, and Nigel is also charged with assault. 15-year-old Stuart is taken into care.
This is a child who basically had a mother that he loved and cared for, who suddenly wants nothing to do with him. And it's catastrophic for a child to experience that level of neglect and must have left Stuart feeling absolutely desolate.
She don't deserve the title of mother at all, because no mother should have allowed what she did to Stuart.
Nigel is convicted of neglect, assault and false imprisonment and given a 3-year custodial sentence, while Susan is convicted of neglect and given a 12-month suspended sentence. Stuart moves away and has no contact with his family, including his brother Michael. Stuart becomes a father himself.
Now I've had my little boy, little Alfie, I sit there and I cuddle him and he tells me he loves me and that, and I tell him, and I sit there and think, why couldn't my dad love me like that?
Meanwhile, in 1996, Nigel Bacon is released from prison. He and Susan start a successful security firm. 10 years later, Nigel fulfills a lifelong dream and becomes a gamekeeper, leaving Susan and his 18-year-old son Michael to run the security firm. But Nigel doesn't see their son Michael as a deserving heir to the family business.
Michael and his father had a difficult relationship. Nigel wasn't proud of Michael. He thought of him as a bit of a failure.
Michael wanted to take over his father's company, but his father was not prepared to sign that company over to him. And by this point, resentments are huge.
Michael had been promised the business. He'd also been promised that he'd own Wordsworth Avenue, which was obviously the original family home.
In September 2008, 20-year-old Michael gets married, but Nigel dislikes his wife and her family, and he drops a bombshell.
My dad decided that the day that Michael married Natasha, he wasn't getting anything, and he made that clear to everybody. Michael wasn't getting the house no more. He was no way getting the business.
Nigel's decision is not a popular one with his wife, as Susan had promised her son he would take control of the business.
My mum spent years promising him, oh, you put with this, you do this for me, you do that for me, because this business is going to be yours, I promise you. Well, my mum couldn't keep that promise no more, could she? Because obviously my dad had stuck his heels in, had said no way. And when my dad was like that, we meant it, there was going to be no way of changing his mind.
While Nigel is extremely well off and has accounts of more than £300,000, his son is living beyond his means.
Michael had got a few debts around cars and things he'd bought, sort of luxury items that he'd bought.
Michael were in a bit of debt, and I think he wanted his dad to bail him out, but Dad wouldn't.
This demonstrates two things. Firstly, his unwillingness to support his son, and secondly, potentially the power that he holds over his family. Here is a man who has lots of money and could easily lend his son that cash, but decides not to. And this really, really upsets Michael.
Michael isn't the only one in his family with money problems. Susan has debts of more than £60,000.
We know that Susan liked to spend. She got into a huge amount of debt.
We were aware that Susan had had a letter from Inland Revenue for some money she owed the taxman.
They had a lot of debts around their neck, and there was no way my dad would have bailed them out.
That is going to make her angry. That's going to make her want to seek revenge. She's greedy, she's devious, she's in debt. And I think that's the key here. It's got nothing to do with any other explanation. She wants his money.
It's unclear whether Nigel let Susan have access to his accounts. But it is certain Susan needs money fast and is willing to go to any means to get it.
It's clear at this point that Susan has made a decision, and that decision is that she wants to get out of this relationship. But it's not just enough to walk away from the relationship. She doesn't just want to divorce her husband. She wants to make sure that she walks away with everything. And the only way that she can do that is to kill him. It's as simple as that.
Susan enlists the help of her son Michael, who, like his brother Stuart before him, has been a victim of violence from his father.
When this opportunity is posed by Susan, it wouldn't take much to convince Michael because of the resentment he was building up about his father.
We have to remember that Michael was also a victim of physical abuse, and he was also a witness to domestic violence.
I believe that he thought that his mum was right on everything, that his mum thought that they'd get away with it, she was plotting the perfect crime.
This was a very calculating move as Susan. She needed Michael. She wanted Michael to help her dispose of Nigel.
It's clear she was the driving force behind this. She was the one that was driving everybody to be involved with this. She was driving Michael.
I don't think without Sue he would have even considered it. I really don't. I do believe she manipulated him into it, and I think he was too scared to do any different because she was a manipulating person.
Susan wants Nigel dead, sooner rather than later.
Whatever the plans were, she needed it done before Christmas. It had to be done. They was both adamant that it had to be done before Christmas.
Susan starts approaching people she knows through the security firm, offering financial gain in exchange for the murder.
When she approached people asking them to kill her husband, she would say that she was a victim of violence, and she would use that as a reason why she wanted her husband dead.
However, Dr. Kerry Nixon believes this plot was all about financial gain, and not as a result of domestic abuse from Nigel.
In this case, it was clinical. She was hiring somebody. It was a business transaction. We would have seen a completely different set of events if this was about abuse.
We know that she approached at least 4 other people and asked them if they'd kill her husband. That's evidenced far back as the September. And she'd basically been offering people money to make sure that her husband died.
I believe she contacted quite a few people. One of them was a guy he only actually knew her through the business because they'd done him some security work. He said that he'd had a phone call from Sue and she asked him if he could do her this job. She told him it'd be easy because they lived down a dark lane and he had a bad heart anyway, so it'd be easy, in and out done.
He refuses to get involved. Eventually, in October, Susan manages to find someone who is willing to carry out her devious plan. A local man, Peter Jakes.
They know that he's in over £120,000 debt. They approach him and offer him money to kill Nigel, and because of his debt, he agrees to do this.
On November the 25th, 2008, Michael meets with Jakes to make the initial payment of £1,000.
Michael also met Jax in Clumber Park, car park, and exchanged money, which later that day he actually went and purchased some clothing and knives, which I do believe were from the money Michael had gave him.
Susan thinks she has come up with a foolproof plan.
She planned this to look like a burglary. She was going to be in the property. They lived in a secluded house with their younger son, and she was going to ensure that the lights were all turned off. She was at home, and then this burglary would take place and a murder would occur. So she was thinking that by putting herself in the house and being there, that would provide the perfect alibi.
On November the 26th, Nigel Bacon is at home with his wife Susan and their younger son.
All I know is Dad had gone to lock the gates. As he'd gone up the drive, the lights went out.
Nigel is stabbed 6 times in the drive and left for dead. Bleeding heavily, he staggers to his feet and makes it back inside to the kitchen.
I don't think she expected my dad to come back in that bungalow. I think she thought he'd die on that garden or on that drive. I don't think she expected him to have the strength to get back in. And I think it shocked her that he was strong enough to actually manage to drag himself back into the bungalow.
Susan's perfect plan is under threat. And she makes a call to the police.
At 5 to 7 on the 26th of November, we had a phone call from Susan Bacon. She'd phoned 3 9s to say that her husband had been attacked and was back in the house and was bleeding heavily. She rang to tell us that's what happened and asked for an ambulance and for the police.
My husband went to shut the gates. Somebody tried to stab him.
Your husband's been stabbed?
Yes, there's blood everywhere.
Michael arrives at the home a few minutes after the stabbing, but it seems he has no intention of helping his dad.
They must have been stood there thinking, I hope he dies, he's got to die.
Susan and Michael thought they had planned the perfect murder, but will they get away with it?
She wanted him dead, she wanted his money, and she wanted to start a new life.
Not only had she recruited somebody to kill her husband, but also she actually helped them do it.
If he only knew that she's the reason he's laid there, taking his last breaths.
It's the 26th of November 2008, and Nigel Bacon is fighting for his life after being stabbed in the driveway of his home in Clumber Park, Nottinghamshire. When the paramedics arrive, his wife Susan doesn't seem too concerned about her dying husband.
She's coolly sitting, having a cigarette, showing no signs of distress, no signs of being upset or panicked. She's just sitting there. And this tells us everything. He was nothing to her. She didn't care at all about Nigel. She wanted him dead, she wanted his money, and she wanted to start a new life.
Nigel is taken to hospital, while Susan and Michael are taken to Worsop police station to give statements. Around 8:30 p.m, Nigel dies in hospital. Susan seems to be devastated when she hears the news.
She appeared to be grieving for her husband in the early stages and seemed to be very upset about what had happened.
When police look into the victim's background, it becomes apparent that Nigel was a violent man.
We became aware that the potentially there was some violence within his relationship with Susan, although that hadn't been reported to the police. And we're also aware of an incident where he'd assaulted his son quite a long time ago, and that son was estranged from the family.
And that son is Stuart. 14 years after he last saw his family, he has a call from the police.
When the police turned up and told me what happened, I didn't know what to think. I knew my family was strange and everything, and I knew that we was different, because obviously I was part of that family at one point. But I didn't think that it'd go that far.
Stuart is confused about his feelings over his dad's murder.
It made me think about all the time lost, and that maybe I should have gone and found him, and maybe I should have tried and talked, and even if he didn't want to listen, or even if he was still the same arrogant bloke he was, I should have made more effort, because I wouldn't have felt as empty as I do now.
Lindsay and Kerry, who Nigel refused to recognise as his daughter right up to his death, find out about the murder. And Kerry has one suspect.
Then police came, and they said that he'd been murdered. And I asked if I had any suspicions who it could be. And the first person I said was Sue. Don't know what made me say it, but I just turned around and said, I think Sue's got something to do with this.
Police take statements from Susan and her son Michael, but his account raises suspicion.
Michael said that he had driven to see his father and his mother around the tea time and had left. And when he'd left, he'd gone back towards his home address and got almost home when he'd received a phone call from his younger brother asking him to go back because there was a problem with his dad. When we looked at Michael's phone and where his actual cell site, where his phone was being used, he'd actually never left the area, so we became a little bit concerned about him in the first instance.
However, when they interview Susan, she tries to put them off the scent, blaming Stuart.
I think for her it was dead easy, or Stuart, his son, he's got issues with the family, go and see him, he's more than likely to be behind it. I was fuming with my mum, to be honest, because I felt like, how dare she, I'd spent all these years staying away, and then all of a sudden, whether I wanted to or not, I'd been dragged all into this. Literally, my life was just turned upside down.
This is a woman who not only has murdered her husband, she now wants to put the blame on her innocent child, somebody who has done absolutely nothing wrong. And that's the mark of her character. That's how dark, deceptive and sinister her character is.
Meanwhile, forensics work on the murder scene, and it appears the killer has left some evidence behind.
As part of our search on the first couple of days, there was a hat that had been discarded sitting on the mat, and we recovered from there I'd call it a snood. It's like a scarf that you put around your neck, when you're skiing, like a tube. We did some DNA tests on that. It came back with the blood of the deceased and also the DNA of Peter Jakes. So at that point, we believe Peter Jakes was involved in the attack on Nigel Bacon.
The police have evidence that Jakes was there that night and are able to link him with Susan and Michael.
And when we got the DNA profile of Jakes, we did some work around establishing who he was, trying to locate where he was, and we very quickly established links, telephone links between Jakes and Michael Bacon, and Jakes and a number that we know was being used by Susan Bacon. We knew that she'd got a phone that we called the dirty phone that she used to make contact with Peter Jakes. That phone was registered in the name of Susan Bacon, but had actually got a different address.
The net is closing in on Susan and Michael, and the police find out about Michael's meeting with Jakes.
On the day before the murder, Peter Jakes has been paid some money up front and he's gone into the local town centre and bought some clothes, what we called his killing kit, if you like, some dark clothing, the snood that I've mentioned, the gloves, the hat. He's bought all of that. We can also show that he bought the knives at a local Tesco on that same day. And then on that night, and that's the Tuesday evening, we know he's gone to the address, gone to Keeper's cottage and checked the place out, if you like.
Peter Jacks was not an effective contract killer. At the scene of the crime, after murdering Nigel, he left his beanie hat, he drove to the house in his own car. When he tried to destroy his car, he set it on fire, but he left a knife in it. He also went on a shopping spree just after it. So all the evidence was there to say that this was a man who'd been involved.
They show themselves to be complete amateurs. There's nothing organised about this in the way that they are sloppy in preparing the murder, the way that they leave evidence around.
The police are able to prove that Susan played an active role on the night of the murder.
I think what's indicative of how cold she was that not only had she recruited somebody to kill her husband, but also she actually helped them do it. What we could show was that when her husband had gone out to shut the gates, she actually switched the electricity off, therefore assisting Peter Jacks in his attack, really. So she knew as her husband went out exactly what was waiting for him, exactly what was going to happen, and she helped them do that. The fuse box is situated in the kitchen, and the one that's labelled external lights, which is the one Susan Bacon will have flicked off, is also linked to an alarm that's monitored by another company. And what we managed to establish was that alarm was actually deactivated for a period of about half an hour before the call was made to the emergency services. When she phones the ambulance and she's talking to the ambulance struggled to find them for quite a while. And they ask her about the lights on at the address. At that point, it obviously dawns on her that she's forgotten to switch the lights back on, because it's my belief that Nigel Bacon coming back into the house meant the plan had gone wrong, and she forgot what she'd got to do at that point.
Susan switches the lights back on, sealing her fate. And the main motive is discovered when police find a vast amount of money at the property.
There certainly was hundreds of thousands of pounds at the address that we recovered.
Susan owes more than £60,000 to the taxman, but she claims she has access to her husband's money.
She would suggest that she did have access to the money and she could have paid the bills and the debts off that she had. And I think that's probably because that suited her defence. She didn't want it to be seen as any sort of motive for the attack, really. But she had debts, which compared to the money they'd got were tiny, yet they hadn't been paid off. We would assert that maybe she couldn't actually get her hands on the money to do so.
She's in a lot of debt, and there's a man sitting there who she's in an unhappy marriage with, who's sitting on money and will not give her money. And I think that's crucial here.
3 weeks after the murder, police have enough evidence to charge Susan, Michael and Peter Jacks with murder.
Throughout the whole of her time in custody, Susan Bacon denied any knowledge of the offence. She admitted that there was some domestic violence, she had been subject to some assaults, but that wasn't a reason for her to want to kill him, and she knew nothing about anything, and she wasn't involved in it at all.
If this was a case of a woman killing her husband because of abuse, she would have talked about that. The reason why she said she didn't know anything about the murder is because she was trying to get away with it.
Despite all of the abuse his father inflicted on him, Stuart is still adamant that his father's murder was inexcusable.
My dad didn't deserve that. I walked away from everything I knew and everything I loved, and if I can do that as a child and lose everything, why can't a grown woman do that?
I think she just stopped with him all these years because she could have got out. My mum did. She could have got out no matter what. But because of the money, she knew my dad would make sure she wouldn't go with any money. She had to find another way. And the only other way was killing him.
This was nothing about any potential abuse in the relationship. It was about money.
While he's in prison on remand, Stuart visits his younger brother Michael, who was just 8 years old the last time Stuart saw him.
He was angry because him and his wife wasn't going to get their perfect life. He was all pent up, and behind all that, he had my mother just fueling it.
Never dropped his mum in it. I think he believed everything she said, and I think he believed she had all the good ideas, and she probably sold this to him, that it would work, he'd be out of the way, they could have the money, they could have the company, and I think he just followed along, really.
She was begging him to take the rap for her, telling me it's all you, get me outside and I will look after you, and for a while he bought it.
She's tried to put the blame on everybody else rather than her. She neglected Stuart for years. She showed no love and emotion. So the fact that she shows no remorse when she's in prison doesn't surprise me at all. She's a cold-hearted, selfish woman.
Stuart plucks up the courage to visit his mum in prison.
I expected to find a woman, I suppose, in bits. And she wasn't. She was still that same arrogant, cocky mother that didn't care about anything but herself. She was trying to make out to me that Michael was the murderer.
Stuart did go and visit her in prison. And this was a risk, you know? This is a woman who had blamed him for the murder of her husband. This is a woman who rejected him, but for whatever reason, he needed some kind of closure. So Stuart visits her only to find that she doesn't care. She doesn't care about what she did. She takes no responsibility for her actions, and she continues to be the cold and distant woman that she had been as a mother to him.
I'd spent years in my heart longing for my family, for my kids. It's always been about my kids, not me. And then I'm sat there on this visit and I'm thinking, thank God you've not been near my kids. Thank God my kids were there and you were here, because, wow, look what you've done to my brother.
In December 2009, in Nottingham Crown Court, Susan Bacon, Michael Bacon and Peter Jakes are on trial for murder. Kerry and Lindsay are at court, but Susan isn't happy to see them, especially Kerry, as Susan still refuses to acknowledge her as Nigel's daughter.
She just sat in a box, just staring and shaking her head. And then at times she'd turn around and glare at us.
In court, Susan is keeping her act up.
During the trial, she portrayed the image of a woman who was falsely accused of killing a man that she loved. And I remember she would always say she loved the bones of that man, that she said that quite a lot of times during her evidence.
Susan continued to lie throughout the court case, protesting that she actually loved her husband and saying that she would never have killed him. And yet we know that she orchestrated the murder.
The telephone call made by Susan is played in court, and it's incredibly hard for Nigel's children to hear.
What bothers me the most is I listened to the 999 call, that was made by my mother when it happened. And in the background, I hear my dad telling my mum that he loves her.
That broke my heart. When I heard that, I thought if he only knew that she's the reason he's laid there, taking his last breaths.
She didn't care. The one time that he wanted to be sincere, with his love and that, the person he was giving it to wasn't bothered.
It's just heartbreaking to know that that evil woman, twisted, has actually murdered him, and it's her husband. She's supposed to have loved him.
He's lying in her arms, dying, and he says, "I love you." It takes an incredibly cold person to be told by the man that you've spent 20 years with that they love you, and for you to just hold them, knowing that you've killed them, and then lie.
As violent as he was, he still loved her. And then for her to go and plan and go through with what she did behind his back, just pure evil.
But will Susan's portrayal of grieving wife be enough for the jury to find her innocent?
I think the only person that Susan was interested in was Susan.
Stuart has to cope with the fact that his mother and his brother murdered his father.
I'll always love her. She's my mum, but I hate her.
It's December 2009, and Susan Bacon, her son Michael, and hired assassin Peter Jakes are all on trial for murdering Susan's husband and Michael's father, Nigel Bacon.
To the outside world, Susan appeared like a caring, loving wife with a successful life and a successful husband. But what everybody failed to see, that actually she was a cold and calculating killer, ready to murder somebody that she'd spent her life with for personal gain.
On the 18th of December, the jury find all three guilty of murder. Michael is given a life sentence with a minimum term of 21 years. Susan is also sentenced to life with a minimum of 24 years. And Peter Jakes is also sentenced to life and ordered to serve a minimum of 26 years. The judge calls it a cold-blooded contract killing and describes Michael as his mother's creature, claiming Susan is the driving force behind the crime.
Everything that we know about Susan, she was a neglectful mother. She didn't show love and emotion. She didn't show love and emotion at the point that her husband is dying and saying that he loves her. This woman shows no feeling whatsoever.
She was just a very cold, calculated woman who knew what she wanted and would stop at nothing to get it, and was quite prepared to drop other people in it, including her own son, to keep herself out of trouble.
Evil woman, calculating, manipulative, vindictive. Anything she comes into contact with, she destroys.
I think the only person that Susan was interested in was Susan.
To be murdered by your own family, I don't think there's anything lower than that.
For Nigel's 2 daughters from his previous relationship, even though they never knew him, the murder of their father has left them devastated.
I've missed a big chunk of my life because obviously he's your dad and you should be able to count on your dad. And he's never been there, and I do believe it was because of Sue, I really do.
It's really hard to grieve for him because we didn't know him, but at the end of the day, he's still our dad, also and daughter.
And Lindsay will never forgive Susan.
I blame her for everything, everything. I blame her for my mum and dad breaking up, I blame her for him taking him away and now taking his life. I blame her for everything. She deserves all she gets. I hope she rots in that prison.
Meanwhile, Stuart is left to deal with the betrayal.
Stuart has to cope with the fact that his mother and his brother murdered his father.
Stuart still has contact with his younger brother, Michael.
I still love my brother, and he's still that little boy that I left behind. I know he's a grown man, and I know he's done these terrible things, but I find it hard to accept some of what he's done, just because he's my brother and I know what my mum's like. But I don't think I can forgive him because it's still murder.
But he has cut off all contact with his mother.
I'll always love her, she's my mum. But I hate her, and that'll never change.
For Kerry, the murder of a man she believes to be her father has left her needing closure. When Nigel died, he was still refusing to accept her as his daughter.
If I could have had only 5 minutes with my dad, I would have been happy. Even if it were just to ask him to do a DNA test, just to prove that I was his daughter. I know I'm his daughter, but just to have it in black and white would mean everything to me.
So Stuart agrees to a sibling DNA test to establish if him and Kerry have the same father, Nigel.
I think finding out a proper roots, a proper family genes, a proper family background, I think it'd make her a lot happier.
Kerry has been waiting for this day for more than 30 years.
Nigel Bacon is definitely my dad.
Kerry is Stuart's half-sister.
Hopefully we can all move on now. It's there in black and white.
The 3 siblings are determined to stay together as a family.
Since the murder, Stuart has managed to forge a relationship with both Kerry and Lindsay. He now feels that the one thing that he's managed to gain from this horrible set of events is a close family unit.
That's the one good thing that came out of all of this, and I know that's daft to say that you can sit there and say that anything good came out of the circumstances of murder. But I found my family. I got my sisters back.
It's nice to actually know that he's back in us lives again and he ain't out there on his own.
They're there for me.
And Stuart wants to make sure his family's future is a happy one.
I just take every day as it comes. I focus around my kids. As long as they're happy and they're loved and stuff like that, I'm happy. And that's just how I take life.